Thank you, Smriti. So, yeah, unlike other presenters of product roadmaps, I'm not part of the product management division of SAS. I'm actually part of the global technology practice where we align with customer needs and what's happening on the development side. That being said, I was part of product management before. I was a product manager in the NLP division, natural language processing. And I know this feeling. I know that these guys, behind all those confident demeanors, very confident self-talk, behind those, there are very basic emotions. Most strongly, a sense of relief that some things happened. Because building products is hard. Getting people to align on a common motive, understanding different pros and cons of approaches that you take is quite difficult. But when it comes together, it's really satisfying. So one example is that of SAS Data Maker. SAS Data Maker is our focused offering for synthetic data generation, available on the Microsoft Marketplace, formerly known as Azure Marketplace. And as you can see here, it's easy to retrieve. You can locate it easily on the Azure Marketplace, search for it. You'll be presented with a wizard-like interface, allows you to install it in your own Azure tenant without having to meet a SAS guy at all. So that's part of the future we are going to. Focused offerings, modular offerings that do one thing and do them well and are easily accessible and installable from a common marketplace. Right now it's Azure, but then hey, Data Maker is about 6 months old. We just released in November. This is the start of things to come. So when we look at solutions like Data Maker, they are cloud native. That means they are tied to resources in such a way that those resources are easily scalable and made available to you upon need. It's a standalone managed offering that refers to the architecture through which it's deployed, not pure software as a service, but through a split plane methodology, which ensures that you host the application in your tenant. You have the confidence that all your data is secure, but management of the application, updates, refreshes, all that administrative headache is taken care of by SAS. It's no code, built entirely according to the no code paradigm, so it's very intuitive, easy to use, and furthermore, it is really cheap. You don't have to pay anything to SAS at the time of installation. You pay at the time of generating output, and you generate output only when you realize that that output is useful. So that being said, we have seen what Data Maker is, but why did we think about Data Maker in the first place? So let's talk about that for a while. Now, what happens is that data is a very sticky issue for organizations. Organizations face issues in accessing data. Some organizations have issues in even having the data in the first place. They need to source it from outside. They face multiple challenges with regards to use of the data. These issues can be summarized in terms of access, sufficiency, cost, and collaboration issues. Access, enterprises, and it's large enterprises we're talking about where there are different divisions with clear ownership patterns laid out across data assets and artifacts. You would like to use your data for generating new solutions, be they analytical solutions or any other solutions, but you're constrained. Why? Conditions imposed by external regulations, policies are followed internally, clear separation of duties that are imposed because that's the nature of the game. Think about banks. You don't want one guy having access to all the systems. So those reasons exist for a good reason. I mean, those are valid reasons why there is separation and controlled access to data, but it inhibits innovation. Sometimes you might not have enough data. Data is insufficient, not across the board. We kind of passed that problem, but data is insufficient in rare events in terms of certain classes which for historical reasons or systemic reasons have been underrepresented. So you have an imbalance problem which manifests itself in bias down the line. You need to address it, and it's better to address it upstream. If you want to acquire data to make up the gaps, you either source it from outside or you develop new ways of measuring the data and collecting the data. Think about the cost of, in case you're missing information on heat provided by a set of industrial ovens, would you stick your head inside the sensor, inside the oven to, take a reading? That is cost. So there is a cost associated with getting additional data to actually make up for the data that you don't have. And finally, there's a trend in certain industries, financial services, insurance especially, a trend towards consortium models. People have realized it's better to pool together information to address a common problem. But the problem is when you pool together that information, you're given part of your data away. You need to ensure that the data that you contribute happens to protect customer information. So these are all the problems. I mean, there are problems everywhere. What do we do in order to solve these, or at the very least, work around them? We use DataMaker primarily as a means to generate synthetic data that's very similar to original data, retains its characteristics, but does not have the associated problems and data leakage risks associated with it. Through DataMaker, you can create projects tightly defined for a given business domain, and select your data. We are quite flexible in terms of the data that can be selected through an input data container, different formats, Parquet, SAS datasets, CSVs, zipped forms of CSVs. All these data assets are automatically analyzed, and a data mapping activity takes place. An entity relationship diagram is drawn on the fly. Now, while DataMaker is intelligent, we don't allow it to take all decisions. You can act as the human in the loop and take care of data configuration decisions yourself. You can take into account changes in relationships and even define the way synthetic data should be output. The next step is to train a data generator. This involves choosing a machine learning method which trains a program, and that program results in an executable. That executable can be called many times in the future to generate data upon demand. You choose an algorithm. We have a range of algorithms. We got about 3 algorithms with their variants. We got settings, additional layers of data protection such as differential privacy, which help you protect your data further by injecting some randomness into the training process. You carry out the training process. You are provided with a range of evaluation metrics which assess the synthetic data on similarity to original data as well as the amount of information it leaks about the original data. You need to find a sweet spot among the two, and that sweet spot is determined by the use you wish to provide to the data. In case you want to indulge in volume testing and you don't really care about similarity, you might give a lot of importance to disclosure risk and be easy on similarity risk. If you wish to train a model, you need to give importance to that too. So that's where people who have access to data, they have done their job. People who need to use the data, we provide them with a convenient, easy, one-click button where they can define the number of observations they want. And DataMaker has done its job. It provides data in a location easily accessible for a downstream use. This downstream use can be for modeling activities, for validation exercises, for testing. And as you can see here, all of this could have been done through an algorithm, but you use an algorithm in the middle of a project, forget all about it. You need a governed process, and that's what enterprises are all about, rather than what individual data science teams are all about. You need governed processes to assess data, understand the shape of your data, and then generate synthetic data assets. So all that is good. That was a fast tour, but if you want further details on what DataMaker can do, you can come over to the Data Maker booth. It's right at the back, so you got a good long walk at the end of it. And we are happy to show you further demos there. Let's now shift to the question of, this is what we have done. This is what we have come out with as part of a generally available release in November. How can we make it better? It's always important for a product to continuously evolve, understand needs. In fact, better to release a product with minimal set of features, understand what's lacking, identify what's strongly lacking, and address those. So based on feedback we've heard from customers, there are certain themes that I wish to touch upon right now. Just a general word of warning, these are only painting a picture on what's possible. None of these are set in stone. These are not to be taken as the exact ways the product would evolve in the future, how they will manifest. Product management, like I said, is a dirty business. It involves making decisions, carefully considered decisions at various points of time. So theme number one is to make Data Maker more friendlier to the analytics lifecycle. We've heard about the analytics lifecycle. If you've been at a SaaS conference, you've heard about the analytics lifecycle. Taking data, running it through a process of discovery, running it through various discovery methods, modeling methods, understanding insights, and then finally packaging it into something that could be as simple as a report or as complicated as a complex decision flow, a business rule running as part of a containerized API. So data to discovery to deployment, the analytics lifecycle is the core philosophy behind which SaaS provides applications. Data Maker can align better with the analytics lifecycle. If you look at Data Maker's user experience, you will find that there are similar themes. There is data management going on. You look at data, you assess data, you take decisions on what type of data configuration you wish to have. The point is, would you wait until data gets presented to Data Maker in the form of a project and then go through the work of assessing all of these? Why not learn from the analytics lifecycle? We got information governance, which is the starting point in the analytics lifecycle, which help you understand what your data assets are all about. You got very similar metrics. You got a profile of the data, got automatically identified special characteristics such as the presence of personally identifiable information, got a profile of the data, you understand issues regarding quality and the general range of the data. All of this is useful information which consider a feature in the future which would easily be sent over to Data Maker to inform the initial project design. So rather than thinking about all the steps you need to take while you generate synthetic data, why not have it perform and operate as a digital twin in parallel with your core process? So at this stage, if we were to hook information governance back with Data Maker, we would have data pre-populated regarding profile of the data elements. Understanding of the data is already part of the system, and Data Maker can consume this data in an easy way to make better decisions regarding downstream synthetic data generation. This need not come from SaaS's information governance alone. That is one example of a catalog system. That's one example of an application that profiles data. There are hundreds of other applications there. Why not have a standard representation which gets over to Data Maker and is easily ingestible there? Now we move further down the analytics lifecycle. We talk about discovery. You got your data, you got it properly configured, it's of a particular shape and form. You carry out some analytics on it. One way of carrying out analytics, which a lot of our data scientists like to do, would be to run a model to predict an event of interest. And they are stymied by the fact that usually they are left with insufficient data, data of low volumes. So there would be a need to scale up data. Why? Scaling up data, or rather relying on data trained on very small volumes, leads to inconsistent and untrustable results. So why not look at incorporating synthetic data generation as part of your modeling life cycle, as part of a knob, a tweak, or a control that you resort to during the modeling phase of your analytics life cycle. You generate your data. Imagine that you would be provided a lot of parameters where you define the type of data you want, the way you wish to generate your synthetic data generator. You can get all into the weeds there, but the point is, at a stage during the modeling life cycle, you don't have to retrace your steps. You understand that data is insufficient at a particular point. You have quick access to make up the difference. Now, this is one way of solving the problem. The core issue for enterprises to answer would be, is this how we want to solve the problem? And the answer to that would depend on what are they using the synthetic data for. At the Data Maker booth over the past 2 days, I've been faced with a lot of questions regarding end use of synthetic data in the especially in a modeling activity. Does synthetic data actually improve the accuracy of models tenfold? Is it such a magical thing? That seems to be the impression given the way synthetic data is represented. But the actual use of synthetic data in the modeling life cycle, the way you see it here is just one option. It's one way of augmenting your training data when you feel that your training data is not enough. But with it comes a lot of challenges. Do you really trust your modeling results once you have corrupted your data with synthetic data? Rather than thinking about using synthetic data as part of your training process, there might be other uses, but those other uses also make use of the same philosophy of being able to access synthetic data generation easily during the modeling process. In this case, we are making use of the same node, but the purpose is different. The idea is to generate data to use as a holdout sample. A lot of times, synthetic data's value lies in acting as a support mechanism. It gives you confidence in the work that you're doing. Why? You make do with the best with what you have. You have a limited amount of data, but that happens to be original data. That's the truth. That's the gold standard. You use it to the best possible extent to derive a solution. But then you find that you have to make certain compromises in terms of your allocation of data for testing and validation. And that's where enterprises find themselves in a bit of a problem. They find that they have allocated all of the data to training activities, because the more training data, the better the quality, but you do not have data for testing and validation. So what do? You make up data, you resort to shortcuts, and those shortcuts are what gives you a lack of confidence in your results. Rather than that, using synthetic data the same way, the way you generate synthetic data really doesn't matter, but the use of synthetic data at the right time as a holdout sample helps you solve this problem by providing you more robust read into the results of your modeling activity. The same philosophy can be applied to additional exercises you might carry out. Not all analytical activities relate to modeling alone. This could relate to basic data exploration, basic segmentation. But there's always the question that arises, you've done your work, you got an analytical output, which is basically a rule or some model of what the world should be. How do you ensure that you test it well? And to test it well, you need data. That's when synthetic data comes in useful. You check the holdout data, the metrics on the holdout data are closer to the training data than data that has been corrupted because it was a compromise. That is the training and validation data that you used originally. So as you generate data, you might generate data for various uses, various scenarios, but a core issue is you need to generate data to the shape and form you want. Not all of the time do you need to generate data exactly as the entire training data that you're using or taking up. What do we do now? We carry out a workaround. We just segment the data and boost the segment that we wish to boost and merge it with the data set and go forward with it. That is extra steps, and extra steps means a lack of a read into a governed process. It involves you having to explain these extra steps later on. Rather, why not make use of conditional generation as a built-in feature within the synthetic data generation process? You have seen this conditional generation or some form of conditional generation during today's morning session. The use of conditional generation, at one level you can think of it as a way to boost your fraudsters magically to 50% from 5%, but a more practical approach, which generally would be the starting step, and then you go towards other use cases, would be to just use it to shape your data that you use for certain more basic activities, validating your initial exercise, validating your decisions, creating data to form various simulations and scenarios, and then carrying out a hypothesis test on those scenarios. So conditional generation is something that I'm confident that we are going to come out with pretty soon, within the next 2 or 3 months. It's more packaged. The idea is that we would like these controls to be available, not necessarily imposed upon designers of synthetic data generation projects, but available for their use at any time. And in the case of DataMaker, our job is simpler because there are only 2 stages. There's training and there's the generation stage. So at the time of training, you can still decide to train only on a segment of your data. At the time of generation, now you have the added advantage of being able to generate only on a pocket or a subset of your data. You got your data. Now the final stages, as you near the end stages of an analytics lifecycle, there are more questions asked about usage, and those questions are more aligned towards business usage, where they are going to be used in a final decision. An example would be a loan review decision. An underwriter at a bank follows a combination of multiple business rules, this is only a simplification, and different models to arrive at specific pricing policies and approval decline decisions for a number of segments, customers belonging to a number of segments. Synthetic data helps you adhere to solid testing for each one of those segments so that you do not ignore a particular niche area, which might ultimately end up giving you a majority of the losses. You can understand exactly what your future would look like. Maybe the way your future would turn out would not be exactly the same, but at least you can draw a scenario given adequate weightage to the various paths that you can follow in a decision tree. The more complicated decisions, the more synthetic data will be useful in terms of providing you data that adheres to these the characteristics of these decisions. So when we look at the theme of aligning DataMaker to work well with the analytics lifecycle, at a basic foundational level, what's required? Ultimately, I can put it all down to a couple of sentences. I can say, oh yeah, we got an analytics lifecycle application. It needs to work with DataMaker. What do I call it? I call it an API, because you're passing on data, saying I request something, you're getting a response back. So we need a data API, a consumable API that's aligned to business operations. It's not about an API, an all-purpose API that says, create a DataMaker project, let it run, then keep checking from time to time, check if results are available, provide the results. That's like treating data generation as a monolith, a separate activity. Rather, touch upon the operations that you access during the course of the analytics lifecycle. An API requires common contracts, and those common contracts need to be standardized, because we shouldn't be operating on the principle that SAS via and certain applications, visual data mining and machine learning, visual forecasting, data studio, all of these are the only consumers of DataMaker APIs. As DataMaker is available in a standalone form, it's available for all analytical teams to consume. That means all other analytical applications should be able to consume it as well. And finally, when you create data, you shouldn't be constrained to just the way your original data looks like. you need to be able to shape data according to your needs. This includes also situations where you need to create data from scratch. So rather than providing original data, can I provide a JSON or some Excel configuration that says, this is a notion of what my data looks like. Guess what? I got a pretty good idea. Most of you might already be doing this now. Where? In ChatGPT. You go in and say, I want 100 fake rows with 100 customers of a certain characteristic. That is an entirely unreliable process. It follows a non-deterministic path. Why not do it in a deterministic way, giving you the assurance of good results? The other theme I'd like to touch upon, separation of duties. A core theme for enterprises, especially highly regulated enterprises, banking, that's where the term comes from, banking, healthcare and life sciences, certain areas of the government, the public sector. This basically says that you don't want one person or one role or one persona to be able to do everything all the time. But guess what? If we think about SAS Data Maker, and if we continue to think about SAS Data Maker in the way it is, you have one person touching the data, touching original data, doing whatever they want with it, then finally generating data and giving it to them. This is scope for data leakage. This is scope for giving a person more permissions and access than they are required to use. So let us align ourselves to the understanding that any process requires multiple personas. Synthetic data generation as a process is no different. It comprises of a generator persona. We can break it down further, but let's keep it simple. A generator persona is usually people who have access to the data assets which are part of an organization. They understand the insights which are part of data. The other type of personas are people who consume data. Think of them as people who come to your shop and ask for data. They do not really need to understand the intricacies of how this data was generated. Sometimes you really want to be deliberately opaque in terms of giving them information on how exactly the data was generated, because you are protecting your data. Most of the time, you are not the owners of your data. A bank does not own all of its data. Some of its data has been provided by the end customers, and it's only a custodian of the data. It's bound, depending on which country you are, it's bound by rules and regulations to take care of the data accordingly and protect the data. So let's be extra careful about it. And that's where the importance of this cannot be underscored. We need to forget about synthetic data generation as just a program, a Python package, or some other service that we run during the course of an exercise and forget about it. Rather, think about it as encompassing all assets of our enterprise and being governed throughout. So when we consider a situation, there is an enterprise and it provides services to its customers on the basis of some data. It could be an analytical solution, it could be a solution based on certain other characteristics. This solution has made its way to the production area after careful promotion, after careful curation in a lower environment. And this lower environment is usually a dev environment, a testing environment, or at the last stage, a staging environment. How do we solve the problem now? Right now, we go back to production level, use Data Maker, generate synthetic data, run it to trace, get the confidence that we have protected our data enough, and we are capable of doing that. Then we move the data to a lower environment. Now that's what opens a loophole. Organizations don't like data movement. At a basic level, it leads to cost. Moving huge amounts of data is no joke. At another level, it opens up a loophole, because even if you're sure that your synthetic data is safe, you are essentially moving something that resided in the production environment, opening up the risk of a compromise when it moves into the lower environment. So we need watertight compartments as far as possible. A way of looking at it further would be to abstract this in a different way. What if instead of generating the data, I first just create the generator. The generator is a binary package. It's a set of machine instructions. It's pre-compiled instructions, which is then moved to the lower environment, and from the lower environment, it can be accessed one time, today, tomorrow, many times to generate data. The other benefit is that if I can move it to lower environment 1, if I can move it to staging, I can also move it to dev, I can move it to test 1, test 2, test 3. I have a choice of the target where synthetic data resides, and synthetic data therefore gets executed closer to the data, reducing data movement. So, we are taking steps in this direction. These steps can be described in terms of a marketplace for generators. Think of it right now as an internal marketplace. That's the initial thought process. Within DataMaker, after you create a generator, you publish that generator and you publish it to a marketplace. That marketplace is a common area where consumers of synthetic data come in. They understand what a particular generator does, which type of data was it trained on, which use cases does it solve, and then they make a decision, an informed decision on using it. Nowhere do they get to a stage where they, even by mistake, can they touch original data. And that's how we protect data further. So this way, if we sum up, when we look in at separation of duties, the idea is to look at different personas and address their needs separately. Creating a marketplace also helps us understand additional needs of those different personas, those consumer personas. And we can come up with newer features for them, provide them better ways of searching for a generator. And second point is that users have separation of roles, separation of duties. They are given the tools they require to do their job. So these were two major themes, but all the small, minor work still exists. We need to take care of finer points. If we are providing an API, just providing a REST API and open API spec makes it too techy, and we want to stick to the no-code paradigm. Can we provide something a little more consumable, something like a Python notebook with easier ways of interacting with this API? So we give you a blend of programmatic access as well as the no-code interface, which continues to be around, and this allows you to do so many other creative things like schedule your generation jobs and so on. Could we also provide you additional tweaks where you can create new variables at the synthetic data creation stage? One important thing is to create a provenance variable. You need to know that in the future, when you come across a data set, a random Parquet file sitting in an S3 bucket, you need to understand, did it come from synthetic data? Did it come from original data? A simple way would be to just add a provenance variable saying, this is original, this is synthetic. Next time you carry out an analysis on a combined data set, you can actually segment results by these buckets. You can also think about creating rules, more well-defined rules saying, if I want to create synthetic data, I need to take care of certain nonsensical situations and weed them out. For example, synthetic data is a probabilistic method. It can sometimes go beyond boundaries. So if I'm creating healthcare data, I wish to weed out anybody who's a male and happens to also have a pregnancy indicator of yes. That doesn't make sense, take them out. Banking data, people who apply for loans in a negative amount. Again, they want to give us money, that's good, but weed them out. So these finer points are additional minor items. We call them Jira items. Jira is our work log, but we continue to look at that in order to ensure that the bigger picture gets supported. So one last point, ultimately everything comes back to data. The core purpose of SAS DataMaker is to generate synthetic data. And you can't generate good synthetic data unless you understand what your data is like. Analyzing data, when you look at other parts of the SAS ecosystem, has become so much more easier due to the emergence of a tighter relationship with open file formats and our recently released SAS access mechanism for DuckDB. We are taking lessons from the same. We are trying to see how we can make use of core capabilities in methods like DuckDB, not necessarily tying ourselves to DuckDB, but the technology behind DuckDB, how can we make use of the philosophy to access data, understand, generate metadata at an early stage so that we make use of a lowest set of information rather than a more granular set of raw data at a very early stage in the process. This helps overall data processing. It helps you gain knowledge of your data beforehand and helps you generate better artifacts which represent your data. So that's the way we look at synthetic data generation. Where are we getting all these ideas from? Partly from our development teams, from internal sources, but mostly it has been through customers. It's a growing list, mainly because we are only 6 months old. We carried out private previews, proof of concepts, and we view these not as an opportunity to sell. Our idea with these modular solutions is not so much about using these customer touch points as a way to push the product, but more to tell them, give them awareness that is there in the marketplace. They consider it, it leads to feedback. That feedback in turn gets channeled into additional improvements. The ones in yellow actually have come about in DataMaker primarily as a result of the private previews we carried out with customers before we went generally available. All of these take the time in coming to market, but the idea is that we constantly wish to have this stream of conversation back and forth so that we can ensure that this is part of a list somewhere. And this basically provides you benefits in terms of synthetic data generation. It opens up access to data. It makes data less costly to obtain, less costly to maintain, and primarily helps your teams innovate analytically. If you'd like to know more, do visit our DataMaker booth. It's there right at the end of the hub, like I mentioned, and also you can capture this QR code on your phones to visit the website and learn more. I'd like to point out that we run a managed trials program. A managed trials is a situation where you're given the option of bringing your own data, or you can look at similar data aligned across industries on a DataMaker environment hosted by us, play around with the environment for a limited period of time, and then you're given the option of installing DataMaker yourself. We help you with the installation process. Like I mentioned, this is different from the standard SaaS offerings in terms of the lack of a SaaS license or contracted formalities. It's more a question of you looking up a product on the marketplace, trying it out, and there is a stage where you find value, and that stage is when the actual revenue or pricing aspect starts coming. So we have lowered the entry barrier for DataMaker. We've in fact been telling visitors to the booth, there are a couple of folks here, experts in installing DataMaker, so we can actually guide you to your process in terms of installing it on your own as your tenant. Thank you. Hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, we can take them now, or you're always welcome to come by the booth later. Good.
Any questions for Sundaresh?
Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation.
Sure.
You mentioned that you would like to have this product also more in the analytics life cycle. Does that also, could that also involve that it is integrated more in the SaaS via? And additional to that, would it also be possible in the future to have this product then in an on-premise environment that we can deploy it ourselves on an OpenShift cluster, for example, so that it's not only available in the Azure Marketplace?
Right. Thank you for those questions, and those two are in fact related together. I'll take the second question first. Question of installing DataMaker on-prem. The way it will happen, maybe not in its present form, because that is tied to an understanding that we are following the split plane architecture. And the split plane architecture involves a control plane operating in tandem with various cloud environments. Now, this could possibly evolve to considering cloud environments or cloud-like environments, clustered environments operating in open source environment, on-premise in, areas, but we are not yet there. But this is definitely part of our considerations. We are looking at the question of integration with VIA first. Now, when we integrate with VIA, the first question that we are trying to negotiate, and I'm frankly admitting that we don't have the answer right now, not at this point in time. But the first question we have to negotiate is, should we confine ourselves to VIA, or rather should we first focus on making this easily accessible by a wider range of analytical equations? Because even VIA evolves over time, and other analytical applications might suddenly be the fancy of some of our customers. Can we make an API that's easily accessible and then follow a practice of tighter opinionated integrations with VIA wherever it makes sense? So that's our thought process.
There are a lot of opportunities for improvement and directions that you already sketched also, yeah.
Yes, and we'd love to hear from you and everybody when you come across over to our booth. We are happy to take them out as take them down as feature requests and continue involvement even after as innovators.
Yeah, because we have very tight security constraints for our data, and we don't want to shift it outside our on-premise environment to do all this nice and fancy stuff.
Right.
So yeah, that's the use case behind this. Okay, but thanks a lot.
Sure.
All right, and I think with that it's a wrap. If you have any other questions, you can find Sundaresh at the booth, or you can talk to him right after this. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.